the Air Force Association Air and Space Warfighters in Action, and another episode. Thank you all for joining us. I'm your Air Force Association President, Orville Wright, and it is my honor to welcome a couple of terrific leaders and guests today. Major General Case Basket Cunningham is the commander of the Air Force Warfare Center at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. And also with us today, Brigadier General Shawn Bratton, commander of STARCOM, the Space Force's new Space Training and Readiness Command. Before we get to know these two outstanding leaders a bit, we need to thank our generous sponsors: BAE Systems, Collins Aerospace, Elbit Systems of America, General Dynamics, Google Cloud, L3 Harris, Lockheed Martin, NextEra Energy, Oracle Cloud, Pratt & Whitney, Raytheon Technologies, Rebellion Defense, the Roosevelt Group, and SAIC. The collective support of our sponsors helps AFA spread the word about the incredible work of our nation's airmen and guardians, and we just cannot thank them enough. Well, having both of our guests here today together highlights your continued commitment and teamwork, the two of you, now that the Space Force is an independent military service. As force providers, both the Air Force and the Space Force deliver on requirements set by the combatant commanders, the warfighters. And as trainers and educators, your commands are each critical to providing the lethality, global reach, and situational awareness that only the Air and Space Forces, airmen and guardians can deliver. We'd like to open by giving each of you a couple of minutes to share your role in developing air and space warfighters. So Basket, let's start with you and then over to Gov.
All right, great. Thanks so much, sir. Well, good afternoon, everyone, from Nellis Air Force Base here in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada. Sir, thanks so much for the opportunity today, and thanks for your leadership of the Air Force Association. Can't say how much we all appreciate what AFA does for our airmen, our families, and the Air Force. And it is a special privilege to get to share this time with my good friend, Gov Bratton. Gov and I have known each other since the fall of 2019, when I was the Deputy J3 at Indo-PACOM and Gov was the Deputy J3 at SpaceCom, and we had a chance to be the cell leads for our respective combatant commands in the first global integrated war games. So we've had plenty of opportunities since then, and both the combatant commands and in our current jobs to be together, and it's a privilege to be back with them today. And it's also clearly a privilege to serve here in the Warfare Center, and especially so with the 13,000 airmen across not only Nellis, but the 20 other states and 55 other locations that make the Warfare Center tick. And I thought what I'd do here is just spend just a little bit of time to give you a broad overview of what exactly we do, especially all the airmen that make the mission happen. So it all happens through 5 wings and 2 named organizations. Here at Nellis, the 57th Wing is our advanced training organization. Red Flag and Weapon Schools are 2 quick examples, but there are many others. The 99th Air Base Wing is the mayor of Nellis and makes and supports all the missions that go on here at this great location. The Nevada Test and Training Range is responsible for providing the battleground that is the place where advanced testing and training takes place here. And then a lesser known org is the Air Force Joint Test Organization, or AFJO, which pursues non-materiel solutions through joint test evaluation activities. And then over to the Florida Panhandle, the 53rd Wing is the Operational Test and Evaluation Organization, as well as tactics development, headquartered there at Eglin, but certainly a lot of force structure here at Nellis as well. Our newest wing, also at Eglin, is the 350th Spectrum Warfare Wing, which we'll have a chance to talk a little bit further about today, but stood up to focus on electromagnetic spectrum superiority and doing a great job so far, birthed out of the 53rd Wing down there at Eglin. And then last but not least, the 505th Command and Control Wing, our C2 organization that essentially does all the missions of both the 57th Wing and the 53rd Wing combined, but focuses on C2 from JFAC to JTAC, as they say in the great 505th. And in this headquarters, I support and synchronize and integrate across all of those organizations as I fulfill my SECAF and CSAF charter signed by both of them for the United States Air Force Warfare Center. Although I report direct to General Kelly in ACC, I'm serving for all the Air Force MAJCOM commanders and the air and cyber component commanders across the Air Force. And then one last point I'll highlight before I hand it over to Gov. Before the Space Force stood up as an independent service, almost every one of those missions that I just talked about had a space squadron or mission within that organization. So clearly those are now separate here, but the teamwork and the legacy lives on, and all those connections that we know how important that is. And in this headquarters, after we transitioned from the Air Warfare Center to the United States Air Force Warfare Center in 2005, we almost always had a space expert as the vice commander in this headquarters. And just to name a few, General Thompson, Lieutenant General Whiting, and Major General Burt are all alum of the Warfare Center vice commander position. And although we no longer have a space force vice commander here at the Warfare Center, those ties still remain strong with Gov's team. And with that, Gov, I'll hand it over to you.
Hey, sir, thanks, and hello to everybody. I'm Shawn Bratton, Commander of STARCOM. We're the newest kid on the block, if you will, just established 5 months ago in August. And I'm talking to you from Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado Springs, which is our temporary location. And so great to be here today. General Wright, thanks to you and the AFA team for having me on, and to my partner for sure, General Cunningham. If you're not familiar with the Space Force organizational structure, for us, what we call field commands would be a major command or MAJCOM equivalent in the Air Force. There's 3 of them: the Operations Command, Space Operations Command, pretty clear in their name what they do, and the Acquisition Command, buying all the stuff on the front end. In between those two, in a way, is Space Training and Readiness Command, or STARCOM, and we do all the training, all the test, all the doctrine aspects, all the education pieces for the Space Force. We're still growing. The command has 5 deltas, which would be a wing equivalent on the Air Force side, and each of those deltas aligns to kind of the missions that I walked through. We got lots of partners and lots of help from the Air Force, especially as we're getting our feet under us. So, you know, I'm regularly engaged with Air Education and Training Command on things, basic training, ROTC activities, regularly engaged with AU and War College and PME, and what we're doing with the LeMay Center out there on the doctrine side, as all that transitions to STARCOM. And then the place I've probably been the most is the Warfare Center out at Nellis. I think I've been there 3 or 4 times, even since we stood up, and we continue to have close ties. We have Space Force unit there as part of the weapons school, and close ties in test and training activities as well. We also tie, I didn't mention them yet, but we're tied closely to AFOTech down at Kirtland and the Air Force Test Center in the kind of DT, OT, developmental test, operational test missions. But General Cunningham, of course, has that as well under the Warfare Center. So we're a little bit of each of those organizations. Of course, the scale of the Space Force is so much smaller than the Air Force. I think we're at about 14,000 folks today. About half of those are military, as we grow the force to 18,000 or so across the FIDEP. And so here in STARCOM, we're about 50% of what we'll grow to be in the coming years. But we did inherit some great capabilities, great missions, and a lot of expertise from places like Air Combat Command. Those squadrons that did range and aggressor missions for the Warfare Center came over in total from General Cunningham to us. And in a way, it's fitting. You know, the legacy, the origins of Star Command go back to the Space Warfare Center and the Space Innovation and Development Center, which were merged into the Air Force Warfare Center when they accepted that space mission, probably 20 years ago. And so, our heraldry is right back to General Cunningham's organization. It's great to be his teammate, wingman, and fellow worker in many cases as we tackle this. Looking forward to the discussion today.
Well, thanks for the introduction. This is a great opportunity, starting with Basket and then the Gov. You all have the ability to take our audience into the fight, and it's a high-end fight. We know as much as you can describe at the unclassified level that you are employing and training against the most challenging threats possibly in the history of our Department of the Air Force. So if you might take us into sort of a layman's version of using red flag. What does it look like to be in a combat aircraft or any one of the full spectrum of aircraft? And then for Shawn, just about every version of every satellite flying or orbiting. So talk to us about what the fight looks like. And from the perspective of Airmen and Guardians, what are we really doing to take on the threat and obviously the fight and win? So starting with Basket.
Yes, sir. It's a great question. And as opposed to using red flag to tell the story, what I'd like to do is actually use a weapon school integration. It's something that Gov and I just sat through together, actually. And so weapon school integration right now, as they get to the end of the course, is the highest end training that we do, live training that we do anywhere in the Air Force. And the first thing I'd say is it is highly integrated across all domains. And when Gov and I sat in the mission brief for the highest end training vulnerability period that the weapons school executed, you have people from all different platforms and capabilities that are standing up, that are briefing all of each other's capabilities and the integration that comes with that. And the teamwork that occurs at that level, as you know, is just so incredibly impressive. And these are our integration experts. So that's the first thing that I'd say, it's integrated. The second thing I'd say is it is incredibly demanding on the highest level of execution in the advanced environments that we face from the adversaries. And so how we replicate those adversaries here at Nellis, we bring the fight in a big way to the friendly forces in order to gain the lessons learned. So from the air domain to the cyber domain, and I'll let Gov talk to the space domain, to all domains, it is an incredibly advanced adversary that we present here to the team. And then the last thing I'd offer on that is that it's the skill sets of those experts as they bring to bear the great firepower that we have in the United States that really make the mission results happen. But more importantly, harvest the lessons learned to go and do it another day and continually iterate to get better. And that's a responsibility that we feel is very important here within the Warfare Center, is rapidly iterate to get better at doing this in line with General Brown's charge to accelerate a change. And with that, Gov, I'll hand it over to you for a little bit of your perspective, maybe from the WSINT.
Yeah, thanks, sir.
Story.
WSINT was a great experience, and it's, obviously the real fight is a joint effort, and so being side by side with the Air Force is great, and one of the great things that Nellis does so well, including bringing in the other services. We're really working hard on the Space Force side. We're writing our initial doctrine, and we have not published yet a 3.0 an operations doctrine. I spent 35 years in the Air Force just learning and understanding how to gain and maintain air superiority, and how we think about things like an integrated air defense and go after those hard problems. In the space domain, we're just not beginning to think about it. We've been thinking about it a long time, but we really got to write it down on how do we think about key terrain on orbit. Do we value geosynchronous orbit more than we value low Earth orbit? Where would we take risk in order to gain and maintain space superiority? What are the greatest threats? Is it the direct send ASAT threat coming from terrestrial that we've seen our adversaries testing recently? Is it on orbit co-orbital threats? Is it future threats in the realm of directed energy and things like that? what are the things and how would we prioritize those as we think about resiliency and defense and negating those threats. And so places like Red Flag, certainly places like WISN and at the weapons school, Space Flag, and then some additional exercise activities that we're going to stand up within the Space Force are going to help us figure that out and then write it down so our operators then can, take that doctrine, make it better, develop the tactics and techniques and procedures to be successful in combat if that day comes. That is certainly, why STARCOM exists, is to prepare Guardians to get the kit ready for both competition and conflict. And I think, the things that the Warfare Center does so well, the ideas about tactics development and how to do integration are ideas that will port right over into the Space Force and will, of course, stay closely tied because at the end of the day, it is an integrated fight. It is a joint fight. Space isn't going to win it alone. Air's not going to win alone. Naval, land, none of it. We're all in this together. It goes back to when General Cunningham and I met at the globally integrated war game, and the fact that I think we both came from the joint environment into these jobs really, really informs how we think about it.
Rundown. Two real Top Guns talking to an audience. This audience, by the way, really, can be helped very much in a wide range of objectives, from Congress to industry. One of Secretary Kendall's imperatives, as you all know, is ABMS. Most of us couldn't tell you what that acronym stands for, but you all not only can tell us what the acronym stands for, you can describe it in the what and the why, or the why and the what of ABMS. It's not an airplane, and it's not a satellite. While those capabilities certainly are all part of ABMS and the system of systems approach to killing targets, could you talk a little bit about what is ABMS, the what and the why of ABMS, Basket, and then Gov?
Yes, sir. So I'll attack it from my lens here at the Warfare Center specifically. And the first is to say, I think that most on this forum know that Secretary Kendall recently described it as no, there's not a grand solution that's coming out. Instead, it's bridging solutions and rapidly getting capabilities to the warfighters. So I'll just talk specifically about how that applies here at the Warfare Center. So the Shadow Operations Center, Nellis, is an organization and a location here at Nellis. Historically, it was Combined Air Operations Center Nellis, which transitioned to really an experimentation ground for new capabilities. And I think more than a few people on this net have either been there or heard of it. And so the role that we are playing at the Shock N for ABMS is as a place to bring in these new capabilities and bring them into the environment of the Nellis, the warfighters, where you've got the subject matter experts who know what a kill chain is, know how a kill chain operates, and they can provide rapid iteration of feedback to industry to see best of breed solutions to have us get better in a rapid way at getting at some of these hard problems that we know exist across the warfighting domains, and to bring decision advantage through the tools that many of you are developing or read about. We also bring those kinds of capabilities into the Shadow Operations Center. So we are the ABMS Battle Lab for the Air Force in that role. And by the way, we also play a very similar and analogous role for the Joint Staff J6 for a JAD C2 in a battle lab for that effort as well, which the two clearly are directly related. So that's a look at ABMS through the lens of the Warfare Center and what we're doing as we work closely with not only the RCO and Brigadier General Valencia in the Headquarters Air Force CFT for ABMS, but also our industry partners. And with that, Gav, I'll hand it to you on any top off you've got there.
Yeah, sir. Thanks. No, I think broadly for the Space Force writ large on ABMS, we're certainly contributors, just like the Air Force is, of course, in things like satellite communications, and as we work towards transport layer precision navigation and timing that would all be part of that architecture. And so I think we're a capability provider into the broad ABMS architecture. I think, within STARCOM, especially when we talk battle management and the need to define how do we manage that fight, both for deployed terrestrial assets and then the on-orbit fight, and ensure that it's synchronized with what's happening in the air campaign, for example, that battle management function that the Air Force does so well with AOCs and the platforms that support, and then the delegated C2 in some cases. How do we think about that on the space side and make sure that we stay tied to the air component in this case to bring capabilities to bear against the adversary? I think that's how we benefit from ABMS. It's the reason we have to stay tied to it so that we can train our respective warfighters together to bring capabilities to bear. Over.
Thanks, Shawn. And then to pull the thread on that a bit more, again, at the unclassified level, you feel like you can pull in the full spectrum of satellite capabilities in the context of beyond collection, find, fix, track, target, engage, assess. And obviously I'm talking about the intelligence community as much as you can talk about that, but do you feel like the ability now, since we stood up the Space Force, and your own ability in STARCOM is to collaborate more effectively with the intelligence community and bring the incredible resources they have to find, fix, track, target, kill targets more efficiently and faster? And then Vasquez, your perspective would be great.
Yes, sir. I think we have a great relationship with the intelligence community and the NRO in particular, of course, as our partners in everything that's going on in the space domain. I think the General Raymond is talking more and more about things like GMTI, MTI from space, and about tactical ISR, and we're just beginning to think about what does that mean for the service? Are those capabilities that we owe to the joint fight that would obviously be tied in, I think, to ABMS as a command and control and maybe dissemination architecture? That the air component has always done that with tactical ISR capabilities within the theater, and it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds over the next couple of years. But certainly Chief Raymond is speaking about that openly. I think those are capabilities that could come to bear that would be leverage the ABMS architecture or JADC2 architecture to the benefit of the warfighter.
Yeah, so sir,
Just if you could expand on that just a bit. One of the discussions over many years has been the amazing ability of certainly F-22, F-35 to pick up ELINT and maybe war reserve modes, that kind of thing at the unclassified level, and then collaborate, if you will, with the IC. So it's a level of mutual support working together with the IC and the use of the advanced sensor systems on combat aircraft, or whatever else you want to talk about in that context.
You bet, sir. No, it's a great topic to chat about. So just springboarding a little bit off of what Gov hit there, very specifically, the NRO has LNOs here at Nellis, and I think that just highlights the importance of what that provides and the importance of that team as we look at integrated joint warfare going forward. So the lens of weapons school integration is a good one to pull in. And as I mentioned, that mission brief that Gov and I sat through, the piece as this all comes together is through all of those domains. And we won't go into clearly into the very specifics of it, but on the lightning bolt charts that we all know, believe me, there are lightning bolts flying through all domains as those subject matter experts are up briefing the game plan on how it is that we're going to attack the problems that are presenting from our pacing challenges. So to your point, sir, that connection remains incredibly strong. It is a team that we continue to build here at Nellis. And I would say the recognition and what Nellis provides in that is why folks show up to the events that they do, because everybody gets learning out of each one of those events, and it makes us all better.
Outstanding. Great response. To move forward a bit, everyone talks about electronic warfare, but you all do it. every day and certainly in every exercise, whether it's red flag or in your weapons school. Could you talk a bit about how electronic warfare is changing how you train? And are your students learning to deal with spectrum denial beyond the usual radars and jammers? Update us a bit, if you would, on electronic warfare.
Yes, sir. So, taking us back a little bit, the days of green flag, when we had the specific flag that was focused primarily on electromagnetic warfare, those days are gone. But what we've done is really pull the importance of that into the exercises that we're currently executing. So red flag is a great example. We're currently in red flag 22 TAC 1 here at Nellis, over 101 different platforms with our key allies and partners. And we all know how important our allies and partners are in this fight and what we face. Australia and the United Kingdom are here. And so while they're out there on the ranges, you may in fact hear them taking off here before too long. They're going to experience communications jamming. They're going to experience across the spectrum, SATCOM, data link, GPS jamming, in this highly contested electromagnetic environment that we all know is what we would face if we ever found ourselves in conflict. But our capability to fight through it and dominate it is what we all also know will help us to keep it, or help to keep us out of conflict, to deter it. Which is the goal there. And so that's the way that we've done it in our exercises. I'll break there, and then I'd also like to, if we get a chance, to talk a little bit about the Spectrum Warfare Wing and the importance of the stand up of that organization. But I'll break there to see if you've got a follow on, or if we want to go to Gov.
Shawn, to add?
Yeah, I'll pick it up just briefly and then hand it back to General Cunningham. But we do provide EW aggressor capabilities. In fact, they're at red flag right now. There's about 30 folks supporting red flag from the aggressor units in Delta 11, which is one of the subordinate units for STARCOM. Those folks are out there bringing EW hate to bear against the flying community, so they can experience that. And I think there'll be more of that in the future. We're obviously influenced by our Air Force roots. We're bringing in Navy and Army, both members and capabilities into the Space Force. But I think what the Air Force did in the flag series of exercise will be informative on how the Space Force thinks about this. So we're talking about building out a specific EW exercise that would look like a green flag. We'll probably put it under a different kind of banner rather than the flag series as we build it out in the Space Force. But that is capabilities that we have today, that we fielded today, and that we're using today. And so both on the aggressor side and Blue Systems, we owe them that same advanced training that General Cunningham's able to give his forces in the flag series, and I think we'll do that as well on the Space Force side. Over.
Thanks, great. And then back to talk about Spectrum, DC to daylight. Go ahead, Betsy.
Yes, sir. So just very briefly in my Spectrum Warfare Wing plug. So the 350th Spectrum Warfare Wing stood up in June of this past year. As I mentioned in the intro, it was birthed out of the 53rd Wing, and what many of us know is the Electronic Warfare Group, of a great history and lore from Eglin, and the amazing things that organization accomplished in the past. And under guidance from the Secretary and the Chief at the time for the stand-up of the separate organization, the specific focus on the electromagnetic spectrum, I think, is going to be very powerful. And that organization right now, led by Colonel Bill Dollar Young, or Dollar Bill Young, is on the path to IOC in this approaching summer. And they're focusing on delivering the capability that solves or reduces the severity of warfighter problems. As you might imagine, mission data file reprogramming is a big part of that effort, and also looking into how we execute Combat Shield, which is our event that we use to see how ready our platforms are for the electromagnetic environment, looking at ways to revamp that in lines with national defense strategy, modeling and simulation, and then cognitive electromagnetic warfare is a hot pursuit there through that organization. So that's just a couple of examples, some really exciting activity that's underway down there at Eglin. thanks for the chance on that, sir.
Thank you. We'll start with some questions from the audience. We've got Greg Hadley up from Air Force Magazine, and then I think Steve Sargent after that, and then Dave Bissonette. But go ahead, Greg, and then Steve Sargent and Dave.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
We can.
Hi, General Bratton, I was just kind of curious if you could talk a little bit more about kind of some of those exercises, those high-level exercises that you wanted to kind of develop for the Space Force.
We're talking, General Saltzman is the S3 or the Chief Operating Officer on the Space Force side. So we're proposing a series of exercises just modeled after the flag series. You might know we do an exercise today called Space Flag that is probably most akin to Red Flag, but it's sort of got everything in it. It tries to be everything to everybody. I think we'll break that out into pieces over time. Starting with EW. So we're running an initial planning conference here in a couple of weeks for an exercise that'll be called Black Skies. And I think, there's nothing too creative going on here, but we, replace flag with skies. And I see the Space Force going down the road of black skies, blue skies, red skies exercises to get after the needs of those specific training audiences. We are also doing an exercise for the first time later this year to meet some U.S. Space Command asks for C2 level events. And so an exercise called Polaris Hammer will kick off in the fall to get after sort of the operational level C2 and how we do that. Black Skies and Polaris Hammer are the two new ones. And then we'll stay tied in with the red flags. We'll keep running the space flags as well for this year and I'm sure years to come.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve Sargent and then Dave Bissonette.
Thank you all for taking the time to meet with this audience AFA has pulled together today. Can you both describe how you're planning and preparing to support agile combat employment in both Pacific Indo and European theaters?
Yes, sir. I'll take a crack at that first. Thanks for the question. So again, I'll just continue to use some themes of weapons school integration just because it's a good springboard to talk about some of this. So agile combat employment, and I won't get into the details about what agile combat employment means, but for example, in some of the higher end vulnerability periods in those fights and weapons school integration, the forces are taking off from different disparate locations where in the past you would see everybody generate from Nellis Air Force Base to somewhat represent the tyranny of the geography that is certainly in the Indo-Pacific, but many of the other areas. And so what it takes to get to the different locations and then rendezvous is representative of what we might see from the distributed allocation of forces across the theater in that agile combat environment. And then if you take just, let's go laser focus down into the AMOS, our Advanced Maintenance Munitions Officer School here at Nellis. Within that course, they're talking a lot about the logistics and sustainment of agile combat employment and what that means for the force and the tool sets and skill sets that we've got to perfect to get at that very challenging part that I know you all grasp, and certainly you hear gets talked about a lot about the logistics piece of agile combat employment. So, sir, those are just a couple of specific examples, and Gev, I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, I think, the things that come to mind certainly are in support of agile combat employment. How do I deliver missile warning to those disparate locations? How do we deliver ISR, the communications that they need? So, tied in at the planning level to understand the needs. That informs everything from, what we're going to deliver and how we prioritize, but also to the protect and defend mission on orbit. If the air component or one of the combat commands is dependent on a specific capability, we got to make sure we're defending that thing, at LEO and GEO so that we can continue to deliver and make agile combat employment successful for either the air component or the joint force.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. Dave Bissonette.
Hi, gentlemen. Thanks for your time today. We really appreciate it. You mentioned the additional red EW challenges that we're giving our airmen as they're conducting their red flag exercises. I think back to the times when I'd be on the range, and when we would bring blue capabilities to the fight, a lot of times we get the cease buzzer, about a minute and 20 seconds into the bowl. Have we've been able to bring some of our better blue capabilities to the fight and actually exploit the the benefits of having that expanded EW coverage. Compass call is merely one example that we could talk about in this setting. Over. Thank you.
Gav, I'll let you take a swing at that, and then I'll follow you.
Yeah, I think, we got to meet the training objectives for the VOL, and it's tough, especially with the aggressor force. They just want to go fangs out. They certainly understand the needs of the trainers, but at some point, they want to bring everything to bear. I think we're better than we have been in the past. I think it depends on what the training audience requires, and that we temper ourselves and sometimes our enthusiasm to make sure we're delivering. But at the same time, we have to be realistic, and maybe that's your key point is, hey, the adversary certainly is not going to throttle back because we're trying to meet an objective. And so I guess in my experience, particularly on the range at Nellis, is we're in a better position than we have been. Maybe the more difficult challenge is, keeping capabilities reserved, and how do we move some of these activities into maybe a digital space or a digital range where we can operate a little more freely, if you will. Over.
Yeah, Deuce, it's great to hear from you, my great teammate from command at Creech. I'll use your question actually to go not directly what you asked, but into something that I think is really important, and that is the synthetic environment in relation to what you talked about there. This is one of my biggest focus areas here, sitting in this seat, as I synchronize and integrate across the organizations within the Warfare Center and the Virtual Test and Training Center, moving it to the warfighting environment in the synthetic world, that we can really get at what your question alludes to there, which is playing the highest end electromagnetic operating environment. And the way that we're going to do that is the synthetic environment, so that we can bring all of our modes in there. We can best replicate the adversary at the highest levels of fidelity and physics. And that is a very strong effort that we've got underway here to transition the Virtual Test and Training Center at Nellis into that capability. So thanks very much for the question there.
Thank you.
Thanks. General Tom Hobbins. Tom.
Yeah, and I had written a question in there, but I think I'd like to switch it based on what I just heard Basket talk about. I'd like to ask Case about ABMS and your vision for Shock N and how that's going to play into the evolving concept.
Yes, sir. Thanks. It's great to hear from you. So the best role that the Shock N is going to play in this is the place that is open for industry. And by the way, we've got two locations for the Shock N. One is here on Nellis. We also have a downtown location in the Howard Hughes Center that provides a little bit easier access. But is a place for industry to bring the best of breed in, to put it in the warfighting environment that is Nellis, and iterate it by subject matter experts that, as you know, are well represented here at Nellis, and some of the exercises and the environments that take place here, and really look for best of breed capabilities. If you think of a DARPA challenge kind of model here within the Shock N, that then rapidly iterates and then through fielding into the warfighter's hands, and working that in close cooperation and concert with clearly that acquisition work and expertise that the RCO brings to this. And then, as I said, General Valencia in the role that he plays there in the CFD in the building. So that's the role that I see us playing. And frankly, that is under continued development at this time.
Thanks a lot.
Let me ask you, if you could, a number of our industry partners on the line, could you describe, Case, a little bit more about what I'm hearing you say, Shock N, point of contact, for example, and facilitate a bit for our industry to participate?
Yes, sir, you bet. So the way that we've organized to support the ABMS Battle Lab, the Air Force's ABMS Battle Lab, is the SHOCN is a organization that sits under the 505th Command and Control Wing. So the 505th Command and Control Wing is the supported wing within the Warfare Center to bring all the Warfare Center organizations together for best of breed support to that endeavor here at Nellis. So that's the best point of contact for reach out. We can certainly provide that the specifics on that offline, but that wing is doing a fantastic job pulling this capability together for our Air Force and our Joint Force.
Outstanding. Ready for any and all questions, but let me, as we stand by for questions, pull the thread a little bit more on how you're selecting weapons school candidates, if you will. Reiterate a bit that obviously to get into weapons school, it's the best of our captains and NCOs too. You've got an NCO track, I know, in the JTAC world. So could you talk a little bit about the application process, the kind of candidates you're looking for, the course itself, from both perspectives, Warfare Center and Star Command?
Yes, sir. I'll take a swing first from here, and then Gov and can pile on with some of the 328th Weapons Squadron specifics, which, by the way, is an amazing organization. That's one of the first tours I had here when I arrived back to Nellis. But so from a weapons school perspective, it's grown quite significantly from the weapons school that many of us online, and certainly the weapons school that I attended back in 1999. And it's really impressive, the number of squadrons, the number of capabilities, the number of warfighters that are getting a chance to go through this training. And sir, to your point, there are a number of advanced instructor courses for some of the enlisted career fields, and that has grown significantly over the years too. So it won't surprise you to say that we're looking for the highest quality officers across the broad spectrum of the Air Force and diversity and the career fields that exist in all that we know. And those officers are in some ways self-selected, but also are selected by their leadership to compete against others across different organizations in what is the highly competitive weapons school selection process. And then as they show up here for 6 months, initially they're all together for academics that ground them all from the same level. And then they split and really get to learn their weapons systems and their capabilities very proficiently and become the instructors in those. But then the big thing that's really developed over the years is, like I said, with weapons school integration, is the amount of integration that occurs and how early it occurs. And so that happens at a very early time within the weapons school syllabus. So by the time that they get to their graduation events with weapons school integration, they've learned already how to execute within their platform, and now they're bringing that expertise into the integrated and that joint environment and the all domain piece of the fight and putting it all together there. So that's just a quick once over of where the weapons school sits today. As always, it's an impressive organization run by amazing individuals. And Gov, I'll let you pile on to a little bit of that.
Yeah, we stay under the umbrella of the weapons school. I have a squadron out there. Delta 1 is the training Delta in Star Command, and then the 328th falls under Delta 1. And they've evolved significantly since I went through. The current Space Weapons School has 3 tracks, and so we bring both officers and enlisted in, and we track them into either orbital warfare, electronic warfare, or space battle management. And the school continues to evolve to meet the demands of the operational force, of course. We send intel officers from the Space Force through the intel squadron there. It's the Air Force squadron underneath the weapons school. And then we're working hard on our cyber officers and enlisted. We operate a little bit different weapon system than the Air Force is using right now. And so we're in discussions on how we work that through. But I think in the end state, we certainly will develop space cyber and intelligence officers and enlisted through the weapons school. And today that's all done under the 328th.
Outstanding. What, Brian Everstein?
Yes, thank you so much for doing this. General Cunningham, I have a couple separate questions if you don't mind. First on red flag, I saw one of the players in this iteration is the E7 from Australia. And this is coming as the Air Force is looking at possibly bringing on that airframe. General Kelly's been very vocal advocate for that. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing with that airframe integrating with US, what you're hoping to see on the C2 side? And also separately, you had touched on the Spectrum Warfare Wing. Can you expand a little bit more about their operations since standing up?
You bet. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so the red flag 22-1 just kicked off. Literally the first vulnerability period was yesterday. And you're exactly right. The E7A from the Royal Australian Air Force is a part of this red flag. And it's a really fantastic opportunity to get to integrate and work closely with our key ally on what we all know is a critical and essential capability for the pacing challenges that we face in the Indo-Pacific theater, especially, but in other theaters as well. So while we go through this red flag, we'll be working to really refine the tactics, techniques, and procedures that it means to work with F-35s and F-22s, for example, in the highly contested environment as they work in collaboration with the E7A. And then we'll work to iterate through those. And I think a lot of those lessons learned will directly apply not only to how ready we are with respect to the current environment, but also will feed into the lessons as we potentially look at bringing the E7 capability to our own Air Force. So that's the first on the E7A. The second on the Spectrum Warfare Wing is just a great collaboration with a lot of different partners across not only the Air Force, but across industry and academia right now as this organization stands up. You know, General Brown has been very public about saying that we've been asleep at the wheel in the electromagnetic spectrum. And I think that the Spectrum Warfare Wing takes that as a fantastic and very professional challenge to tackle this problem head on. And so the leadership that Brigadier General Tad Clark is showing on the air staff and the teamwork that happens from the air staff to Air Combat Command down in the Spectrum Warfare Wing is bringing a lot of progress on that front. As I mentioned, I think one of the more exciting things that we'll be tackling in the near term is the timelines by which we're able to rapidly reprogram mission data files and the importance of that. But then as we move into the future, the cognitive electromagnetic warfare capability is another key and essential line of effort that organization is undertaking. So thanks for the follow-on question there.
Excellent, thank you.
You have anything to add?
No,
John?
sir, not particularly. We're you know, EW has been bread and butter for the space team for a long time. We're developing, I think, a lot on the training side of it, and how we think about that, both on the offensive and defensive sides of the house. And then we're bringing those. That's the team that's at Red Flag right now, that integrating with the air component and conducting training out there. So I think we certainly have a lot to learn on the management side. You know, how do you match and think about targeting and the command and control associated with those kind of capabilities. But yeah, it's inherent in what we do and everywhere from the weapons school to the aggressor units and to the fielded forces.
Thanks. Stu Pettis is up on the net, and then Bob Elder to close out. And I've got one wrap-up question. So please, Stu.
Yeah, gentlemen. So I'm very familiar with Space Flag and Red Flag. I believe they're unrivaled tactical level events. However, do we have operational level events in either service where we can practice how we see our services fighting a war, kind of independent of a COCOM event where, you know, it's going to be a joint fight, but, you know, we can articulate our vision for how a war is going to go? Thank you.
Hey, Stu, sir, if you don't mind, I'll go just because Stu's a good friend of mine, and it's great to hear his voice. So glad you're out there and alive and well. The Stu, Polaris Hammer is the new event probably that you might not be familiar with. We had a request before STARCOM even stood up to develop a command and control exercise for Space Forces really geared at the operational ops center level. So what would be the AOC equivalents, or for us, the CSPOC out of Vandenberg, or the National Space Defense Center here in Colorado Springs. And so Polaris Hammer is specific for that training audience. We'll have our first go here in 22 and see how that goes, and if we're meeting the training objectives. And then, of course, we continue to support the Quebec Command Tier 1 exercises, getting after that. But I do think, to your point, we need to develop a little more of that on the service side. And from my seat, really to tease out the doctrine you need to, gain and maintain space superiority.
Hey, Stu, thanks. I'll pile on. It's good to hear from you. I'll pile on just a little bit. So the 505th Command and Control Wing that I mentioned in my introductory remarks is our organization that executes that level of exercise. So Blue Flag is one that you may have heard of in the past, that is an operational level event that the 505th puts on for the component commanders. I think one of the things that you'll see us get more into recently, I'm sure many of you saw the news release on the lead wings that came from Air Combat Command. And as we look at what it means to be a lead wing in the agile combat employment environment at wing level C2 and distributed C2 in the contested environment, the 505th is also supporting those efforts to more fully develop what those kind of war games will look like to support agile combat employment, and make sure we're rapidly iterating at the capabilities there as we continue to get at that. Thanks, Stu.
Awesome. Thanks, gentlemen.
And we thanks to, he's our first AFA, Air Force Association Weapons School graduate hire that's younger than Dave Diptula and me. So Stu, thanks for joining the fight. Bob Elder, and then a few minutes to wrap up. Bob, please.
Great. It's great to hear both of you, and I'm particularly glad to see how well you are working together. And in that context, and in the context of ABMS, I'm wondering what kind of lessons you're learning about the use of these disaggregated sensors and being able to do battle management with sensors that have not been integrated because of the platform that they're on. And even more specifically, if you've had any opportunities yet to experiment, I guess, with the use of data that comes from a commercial source that you're now trying to use for your battle management purposes.
Yes, sir. I'll take a quick hit at that and then hand it over to Gov. So up front, I would say that is some of the exciting work that the Shadow Operations Center is getting a chance to get into. Not all of the things that you just labeled, but certainly that there's a recognition that that's a capability. So I talked about that we need to pursue. So I talked about kill chains in the Shadow Operations Center. There's a recognition that kill webs is more of a thing that we need to get at than just specific kill chains. Now, of course, kill chains create kill webs, but and the disaggregated sensors that would bring that to bear, I think, are an important part of that, as well as, some of the algorithms and the AI that would make all of that tick. There's opportunities there to experiment with that within the SHOC. So I wouldn't say we've got that problem solved, but it's a recognized area for pursuit. Go.
In the the thing that comes to mind for sure is in the space domain awareness. So, how do we track objects on orbit? We've worked hard to bring in commercial sensors and bring their data into the enclave so that we can plug it in eventually to the catalog in a 2-line element set for objects on orbit. And so there's experience kind of within that traffic management, kind of awareness of things on orbit as that moves into the warfighting side of domain awareness and specific awareness of adversary objects on orbit. I think applying those things across to ABMS, that dissemination architecture becomes key. I think SDA is doing some real interesting work coming up on the transport layer as they try and work through how can we have that architecture that supports JADC2 or ABMS to be able to move data across regardless, almost sensor agnostic, as long as you can access the transport layer. We have some lessons on a smaller scale in the space domain awareness that I think may port over well to ABMS.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thanks. Great answers and great responses. To wind up here today, Basket and then Gov, in being able to define threat-informed requirements, we're probably looking at two of the experts in the world across the Department of Defense and certainly the Department of the Air Force. Secretary Kendall does a great job, obviously, of recognizing, describing the pacing threats of China and Russia. The two of you have counterparts in China and Russia. We don't know their names, but they're working very hard to not just counter you, but defeat you. So could you offer a few closing thoughts on encouraging, if you will, across the audience and certainly as AFA engages from Congress and our education of the public, and certainly in our collaboration with the Department of Defense and the Department of the Air Force? What are those threat-defined requirements that you would encourage more emphasis, increased emphasis on, continuous emphasis on threat-based requirements from your perspective, Basket, and then Shawn?
Yes, sir. So I'll just hit the very specific pacing challenge of China, and that the Secretary has talked in great detail in the open media about his focus on China and what that means. And this idea of decision advantage and the importance of it is all in relation to really starting with the threat first and the capabilities that China has rapidly developed over the years. So I think that decision advantage and what that means in ABMS is a really important one to bring forward. The one that I would bring to light would be the threat-informed piece of the way that all domains are potentially brought to bear, and what it means to fight in that contested environment, and how we're able to rapidly move and communicate across a number of disparate locations, as we've heard agile combat employment come up. I think that's an important threat-informed capability that we all know is critical to employment, and not only employment, but also clearly to deterrence in that environment as well. So those are two specifics that I would bring up. But to your point, starting with the threat and working backwards is something that we do every day here at Nelson when we start both briefs and capabilities with what is the threat and what are we currently facing today. Go.
Thanks, sir. Maybe one of the harder problems we're trying to tackle in STARCOM is the build out of a range for test and training for space capabilities and space operators. How do I take what exists at places like the Nellis Test and Training Range, and what does that look like when I move it on orbit into low Earth orbit or out at geosynchronous orbit, so that we can prepare our operators? And so the development, and General Saltzman talks about it a lot from the Pentagon staff level, the need for us to understand both for developmental and operational tests, but also for the training audience, to live fly against representative capabilities that our operators might face in conflict. How do we think about that? What is rightfully done in the digital space, virtually with simulation, but what has to be done in a live fly kind of environment? I think that defining that architecture is job one that we're working on right now within STARCOM, and then fielding it, it is a life's work that probably never ends, because the adversary keeps developing new capabilities that we have to train and test against. And so I think that, in STARCOM, we call it the National Space Test and Training Complex, would be the NTTR equivalent for us, if you will. General Saltzman talks about it as operational test and training infrastructure, but I think certainly the responsibility to define that and then present it to our operators for test and training is absolutely there. And we do that to prepare Guardians, prepare airmen for competition and conflict. And ultimately, that's the responsibility. We can't ask them to go into conflict without giving them everything that we could to make them ready to be to win those fights that they're going to be in the future.
And sir, I'd just say really quick as a quick reattack, the awesome thing is that the Secretary has clearly spelled these out in the Department of the Air Force operational imperatives. And so I think if, there's a place for folks to look what the Secretary has laid out, and you see a resume in both Gov's and my responses, the 7 areas that he's highlighted are clearly threat informed in what he sees as we need to move towards the future.
Absolutely. And we've just heard him talk about those recently. And believe me, your Air Force Association is your wingman and ever more credibly advocating for you, dominant Air and Space Forces, Airmen and Guardians. And you've helped much to add to our ability to educate the public and be more credible. We can't thank you enough. And we're certainly committed to strengthening the Department of the Air Force and aerospace industry partnership from PowerPoint to real capability. As we close to a smaller group, I'd also suggest, and you can say yes, no, or maybe, but if you wanted to break it down for the public across our nation, it's for our Department of the Air Force, capability and capacity to counter, defeat, dominate the facing threats we see out there. We need more of you all and what you bring to the fight and the capabilities that more than anybody certainly across the Department of the Air Force, really, you know how to use to fight and win. So thank you guys. It's an honor to be with you, and please stay in touch. And that's also true for our audience, up to some 200 today. Provide vectors for your Air Force Association. You're all appointed senior advisors for Orville, Wright, and most of you know that I need or certainly will take all the help I can get. So thanks again, guys, for being here. And we'll go up and down here and go to a bit smaller group. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks, sir.